Andrew Gosden. In 2007, Andrew lived with his parents and sister in Doncaster. On the morning of September 14th, he prepared for school but, instead of attending, he waited in a nearby park until his parents had left for work. Afterward, he returned home, changed out of his uniform, placed it in the washing machine, and took his PSP, leaving the charger behind. There was £100 in his room, but Andrew did not take this money. Instead, he withdrew £200 from his bank account, went to Doncaster railway station, and bought a one-way ticket to London before boarding the 9:35 a.m. train to King's Cross. Witnesses saw him getting on the train alone. The ticket seller at Doncaster recalled Andrew because he declined a return ticket, despite it costing only £0.50 more. Eyewitnesses on the train later reported seeing Andrew, describing him as quiet, and noted that he played with his PSP throughout the journey. He would be captured on CCTV at approximately 11:20 a.m. CCTV imagery of Gosden at King's Cross was not checked until 27 days after his disappearance, by which time the trail had gone cold. CCTV images showed Andrew leaving King's Cross station on the day that he vanished. That was the last confirmed sighting of him. 1 year after Andrew's disappearance, an unidentified man spoke into the intercom at the doorway to Leominster Police Station, claiming to have information about the case. When an officer arrived to answer the door, however, the man had disappeared. There were fears that Andrew may have been groomed by someone that he met online. This was investigated, but searches of his sister's laptop, which he occasionally used, and the school computers found nothing. His parents held the belief that he did not have any social media or email accounts that they were aware of. He also did not own a mobile phone. There was speculation that Andrew may have traveled to the capital to end his own life. His family doubted this but did not rule it out. They paid a company to search the Thames using sonar equipment. A body was found, but it was not Andrew. A further theory was that Andrew ran away in search of a new life. It was reported that his favorite TV show featured a character that left his old life and changed his identity. His parents have continued to put money in his bank account just in case he needs it. However, it has remained untouched since the day he left. After more than 10 years, there is still no trace of Andrew Gosden or any explanation for his mysterious train trip. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. Moving on to the next case. Benjamin Kyle. On August 31, 2004, at 5 a.m., a Burger King employee in Richmond Hill, Georgia, made an alarming discovery. Behind the restaurant, he found a man who was unconscious, sunburned, and completely naked. The man seemed to have been there for some time, as his body was covered in numerous ant bites. The employee immediately contacted emergency services, and the man was transported to Candler Hospital in Savannah for medical care. Without any identification on him, the man was initially recorded as Burger King Doe in the hospital records. It took 2 weeks for him to regain consciousness. Once awake, he stated that he believed his name was Benjamin, and he chose the last name Kyle, explaining that his initials could match the name of the place where he was found. Afterward, Benjamin was transferred to Memorial Health University Medical Center for further care. They noticed that he had cataracts in both his eyes. A charity was kind enough to pay for his operation to get it removed. Finally, 9 months after he was found, he could see himself in a mirror. Benjamin was surprised to see that he was 20 years older than he believed he was. The next few years, Benjamin spent time in shelters and care centers. In 2007, he was diagnosed with dissociative amnesia. Benjamin also spent some time being homeless. It was hard finding a job since he couldn't remember his social security number. There were some people that tried to help him remember things from his past so that he could find his family. They looked through missing person databases, but he wasn't in there. What did help though was he started to remember certain things. He remembered that he was born 10 years before Michael Jackson. The part of his social security number he could later remember was consistent with numbers assigned in Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, and Indiana. In 2015, with advances in DNA technology, his sample was taken so it could be entered into a database. Parabon Nanolabs, led by C. Moore, led the way in the search for his real identity. Initial results that came back showed that his last name is most likely Powell and that he is a descendant of a 19th-century man named Abraham Lovely Powell. On September 16, 2015, he announced that his real identity has been found. He now knew his real name and close family members. In 2016, he said that his real name is William Burgess Powell. He was born on August 29, 1948 in Lafayette, Indiana. So, he remembered correctly that he was born 10 years before Michael Jackson. In 1976, he cut ties with his family and moved to Boulder, Colorado. It's still not really known what happened to him, as it led to him being found. Moving on to the next case. Betsy Ertzmer. Betsy Ruth Ertzmer, born on July 11, 1947, in Holland, Michigan, was just 22 years old when her life was tragically cut short. The youngest of 4 children, Betsy initially studied English and art at the University of Michigan before transferring to Pennsylvania State University after graduation. Her long-term boyfriend, David Wright, was a medical school student at the same university. Reflecting on the loss of his girlfriend years later, David often wondered what might have happened if Betsy had stayed with him that weekend when she was murdered. David had planned to marry Betsy. On November 28, 1969, she was in the library working on a research paper when fellow students found her collapsed on the floor. Bystanders assumed she had suffered a seizure or fainted and began performing CPR. The campus hospital was alerted, and by 5:19 p.m., an ambulance took Betsy to the Ridenour Health Center, where she was pronounced dead shortly after. It wasn't until doctors examined her body that they discovered she had been stabbed once through the left breast. Betsy was wearing a red dress that concealed her blood, and she had bled into her lungs, leaving little blood around the wound. Investigators later concluded that she had probably been stabbed from behind, as there were no defensive injuries on her hands or arms. They theorized that Betsy was likely familiar with her killer and did not fear him. Reportedly, just minutes after the stabbing, 1 or 2 men left the library and told the clerk, "Somebody better help that girl." One witness claimed there was only one blonde man. It's unknown whether it was 1 or 2 men, and in either case he or they remain unidentified. On the back of the murder, police began their investigation and held 5,000 interviews in the course of it. They made no arrests and pinned down few suspects. Nobody seemed to have a bad word to say about Betsy, and she was described as smart and good-natured and had no known enemies. Whilst David Wright, her boyfriend, was considered a person of interest initially, he was quickly ruled out when their good relationship was vouched for by those who knew the couple. And according to friends, he didn't leave the study group he was in on the day of the murder, providing him with a rock-solid alibi. Witnesses were few and far between in Betsy's case. Some reported hearing a scream, while others told of the sound of falling books or shelves, likely from when the student collapsed among the stacks in the library. Consequently, 3 drawings were released of witnesses that police couldn't track down. But unfortunately, these illustrations were highly generic and it appears that the witnesses were never found. The murder weapon was also never recovered, leaving investigators with little to go on. To make matters worse, the murder scene had actually been cleaned up by a janitor after Betsy was taken to hospital, leaving police with even less to work with as any crime scene clues were now gone. Despite the lack of leads or information, police did eventually find several suspects. An early suspect in the case was a man named Robert Durgee, a 27-year-old English professor who died in a car crash in Michigan about 3 weeks after the murder. He was investigated and cleared, although it's unknown what drew him into the eye of the police as a person of interest in the first place. It was also briefly speculated that the infamous Ted Bundy was responsible for the killing, as he'd attended Temple University in Pennsylvania in 1969 and was a frequent visitor of university libraries. However, he was also ruled out. Another fleeting suspect was some kind of military man given the precision of the wound. It was later theorized that perhaps Betsy had stumbled upon a gay couple or encounter and was killed so that she wouldn't tell of anything she'd witnessed. This was thought because when a black light was used on the area where she was found, it revealed human bodily fluids. But the stacks were notorious for couples doing drugs and having sex, so it couldn't really be determined that Betsy had seen anything. The biggest suspect in the case was a man named Richard Hefner, sometimes referred to as Rick. Just hours after the murder, before the news broke, Hefner went to the home of his Penn State professor and asked if they had heard the news about Betsy. It seems that Richard had dated the 22-year-old woman for a brief time, and Hefner told police that their relationship came to an end in October of 1969. Despite the fact that at the time, Betsy had been dating David Wright and they'd been discussing marriage. Hefner told authorities that he didn't know of the murder until the day after it had occurred, contradicting the account that he'd gone to his professor's home to tell of the news of her death. Despite the suspicious circumstances around Hefner, he was never investigated any further. Worryingly, those who knew him referred to him as a sociopath. He reportedly once drove 800 miles to proclaim his love to a woman he barely knew on her doorstep. He also once punctured a neighbor's tire with a knife, and threw dog waste through another neighbor's car window. 6 years later in 1975, Hefner was arrested for molesting a 13-year-old boy, but the trial resulted in a hung jury. After this, he had frequent run-ins with the law. In 1992, he was accused of inappropriate behavior with a child. And in 1998, he was charged with assaulting a woman in a parking lot, which resulted in the victim receiving a dislocated jaw and loosening several teeth. It's widely believed by online spectators and crime authors that Hefner was responsible for the murder of his one-time girlfriend. Although it's unknown why he seemed switched from harming women to young boys, an odd leap to say the least. According to Hefner's nephew, he once heard his mother shout, "You killed that girl and now you're killing me." Betsy's nephew is convinced that Hefner was responsible for her murder. Hefner passed away in 2002, and to this day, it remains uncertain whether he was truly behind the crime. Betsy's family never saw justice for her death, and her former boyfriend, David Wright, continues to wonder about what could have been. 50 years later, Betsy's case remains unsolved. Moving on to the next case. Brian Ninsfield. In January 1997, Brian Dylan Ninsfield was an 18-year-old freshman at Roger Williams University in Bristol, Rhode Island. He was in his second semester and known for being reserved, with a small circle of friends. Having experienced his parents' divorce during childhood, Brian and his parents mutually decided on Roger Williams University because of its welcoming, home-like environment. Brian often felt homesick while pursuing his architecture course. In his free time, he enjoyed reading and listening to music by the water near Mount Hope Bridge. However, he was known to feel overwhelmed by the academic demands and struggled to keep up with his studies. On January 31st, Brian's life began to take a troubling turn when he received a disturbing phone call from a former Roger Williams University student. The caller threatened him, claiming he could still access the campus. Following the call, at around 12:30 a.m., Brian contacted his father, asking him to come to the university. Brian's father advised him to contact campus security, but their only suggestion was to change his phone number. A week later, on February 6th, after finishing his literature class, Brian disappeared and was never seen again. His parents were not informed about his disappearance until February 12th. When they arrived at his dorm room, it appeared untouched, but his mother, Marianne, noticed sand in his bed, which alarmed her since Brian was known for being very clean and organized. Not long after his disappearance, Marianne received a call from a woman claiming to be connected to the university. The caller alleged that a school administrator and 2 faculty members were withholding critical information about Brian and his case. However, the line then went dead. Nothing further has come of this lead, and the woman on the other end of the phone has never been identified. 6 months later in September, Labor Day weekend, A mother and daughter walking along the Hog Island beach located a few miles from Brian's school stumbled across the ghastly discovery of a shoe on the shore, which contained part of a foot inside. DNA showed that the limb belonged to Brian, as did a shin bone that was found nearby. No other remains have ever been found, and the student was presumed dead upon the gruesome discovery. Eventually, the man who had made the threatening phone calls to Brian was identified. He was a former student named Josh Cohen, and was pointed out by campus officials. While Josh and Brian were friends during Brian's first semester, it has been suggested that the two were possibly romantically involved, although no one can say for certain. It's alleged that the relationship ended just weeks before Brian's disappearance. While Cohen admitted to making the phone calls, he claimed they were all in jest. Authorities do not believe that Josh Cohen is involved with Brian's disappearance. There are several theories regarding the case of Brian Ninsfield. Police speculate he accidentally fell into the river beneath Mount Hope Bridge, or that perhaps he jumped from the bridge itself. His parents believe their son fell victim to foul play, and that Cohen, who had made the distressing phone calls, was responsible. Another theory put forward by online investigators is that perhaps Cohen was going to come forward about their relationship, and Brian committed suicide as a result, as he was unhappy or uncomfortable with the decision. Brian's parents largely blamed Roger Williams University for failing to notify them when their son vanished. As the first 24 hours are so precious in a missing persons case, they felt they'd have had a better chance of finding Brian alive had they been alerted sooner. His father, Stephen, said, "I remember just this uncaring, unsympathetic, unconcerned attitude by the university." Stephen and Marianne later went on to sue the school, although it's uncertain if they won their case or not. They also pushed for a national law requiring faster parental notification when a student goes missing. Roger Williams University exhibited questionable behavior regarding Brian Ninsfield's disappearance. Reportedly, someone in the admissions office instructed university tour guides to tell anyone asking about Brian that he was safe at home with his parents. Additionally, there were allegations that individuals at the university were subtly discouraged from providing information, though the exact methods remain unclear. Staff members were also reportedly directed not to answer any student inquiries about the case. Minimal action seems to have been taken concerning Brian's disappearance, which was largely brushed aside by both the university and local law enforcement. The reasons behind this lack of attention remain unclear, but without proper action from officials, Brian's case may remain unsolved indefinitely. Moving on to the next case. Carlina Renee White. Carlina Renee White was born on July 15, 1987, at Harlem Hospital Center in New York City. When she was 19 days old, her parents, Joy White and Carl Tyson, took her back to the hospital after she developed a high fever. A woman, dressed as a nurse, assisted the parents upon their arrival. Unbeknownst to them, this woman was not actually a hospital employee. In the early hours of the morning, she took Carlina from the hospital, kidnapping her. At the time, the hospital's video surveillance system was not functioning, leaving Carlina's parents as the only ones able to describe the woman who took their daughter. This marked the first baby abduction from a New York hospital. Despite widespread distribution of flyers featuring Carlina's image across the country, efforts to locate her proved unsuccessful. In response, her parents filed a $100 million lawsuit against the hospital, ultimately securing a $750,000 settlement. The woman that took Carlina is Anujita and Pedwi. She raised Carlina as Nedra and Ned Nance in Connecticut. Carlina first suspected that, and might not be a real mother, when it could not provide a birth certificate. In 2005, when Carlina fell pregnant and asked again, and provided her with a false certificate. The officials noticed it was forged, however. Carlina then confronted Anne, and confessed then as she was not Carlina's real mother. She lied, however, by telling Carlina as she was abandoned by a drug addict. This caused her to not immediately go look for her real parents. When she was 23 years old, she had started looking on websites for missing people such as the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. There she found a picture of the kidnapped Carlina and noticed that it's similar to the baby pictures she have of herself as Nedra and those of her daughter Samani. She used the hotline to finally get into contact with her birth family. DNA would prove in 2011 that she is indeed the missing Carlina White. And Pedway is currently serving a 12-year prison sentence in a federal correctional institution in Aliceville, Alabama for the abduction. Carlina now goes by the name Nitty since it is a name she gave herself. She does have a relationship with her biological parents, and they are making up for lost time. Moving on to the next case. Daisy Evelyn Shelton. What if a long unsolved mystery from the past were to unfold, uncovering dark secrets and concealed truths? How would a community cope with the revelation of a brutal crime after decades of uncertainty? And what occurs when a confession finally offers new hope in solving a cold case? In June 1964, a fisherman discovered a dismembered human arm in a gravel pit east of Tipp City, located along State Route 571 in Ohio. This horrifying find led to a thorough search to uncover the remainder of the remains. Attempts to drain the gravel pit were unsuccessful, leaving investigators frustrated and in search of new clues. 4 days later, another fisherman uncovered a disturbing find: a burlap bag in a section of the old Miami-Erie Canal. Inside the bag was a dismembered human torso. The mystery deepened as a head and a leg were later discovered in the same canal, gradually revealing more of the grim puzzle. The remains were identified as 43-year-old Daisy Evelyn Shelton, a mother from Dayton, Ohio. Daisy resided on Springfield Street and was employed at Delco, an automotive electronics company. According to a missing persons report filed by her daughter, Rita, Daisy was last seen in late August 1963. She had told her daughter that she would return home soon, but never did. Known for her generous nature, Daisy was always there to support those around her and was beloved by her family for her helpfulness. Her life had been brutally cut short, and the circumstances of her demise sent shock waves through the community. Despite the initial fervor of the investigation, leads quickly dried up and the case grew cold. Decades passed without resolution until 2017 when an unexpected break in the case emerged. In a twist that could only be described as fate, a man fearing he was near his end in a hospital bed made a startling confession to a nurse. He claimed to have witnessed the slaying of Daisy Shelton. Fearing his own impending death, the man felt compelled to confess, disclosing long-hidden truths. Miraculously, he survived, and detectives seized the opportunity to interview him. The witness, whose identity was kept confidential for his safety, shared a chilling account of the events leading to Daisy's murder. His vivid recollection of the crime provided crucial details that had eluded investigators back in 1964, offering new insights into a case that had remained unresolved for decades. The witness recounted that he saw an individual take her life by striking her on the head with a hammer at a home on Springfield Street in Dayton. The brutality of the act left a mark on the witness, who described the scene in grim detail. After the initial blow, Daisy Shelton was dismembered in the home by 2 more men. Her body parts were then discarded in various bodies of water in and around Tipp City. Effectively, scattering the evidence made the investigation more challenging for the authorities at the time. The suspect, who was the only one linked to the hammer, cooperated with detectives and agreed to several interviews. Initially, he firmly denied knowing Daisy Shelton, even though they lived on the same street and worked for the same company. However, during an interview in August 2017, his facade began to unravel. Hesitantly, he confessed to knowing Daisy, marking a crucial turning point in the investigation. As the interviews progressed, detectives meticulously pieced together the suspect's movements and interactions with Daisy. They discovered inconsistencies in his statements and unexplained gaps in his alibi for the time of Daisy's slaying. The pressure mounted as forensic evidence combined with the witness's detailed account painted an increasingly damning picture of the suspect's involvement. Detectives explored the possibility of personal vendettas, financial disputes, and other motives that could have led to her brutal slaying. To build a comprehensive case, detectives turned to modern forensic techniques. They re-examined the burlap bag and other physical evidence, hoping to find DNA traces or fingerprints that could irrefutably link the suspect to the crime. Advances in forensic science allowed them to analyze the evidence with a precision that was unimaginable in 1964. Simultaneously, the community's response to the reopened case was mixed. For some, the resurfacing of such a horrific crime brought back painful memories, while for others, it reignited a long-dormant hope for justice. Media coverage of the case intensified, with many in Dayton and Tipp City following the developments closely. The suspect himself brought up the topic of a box voluntarily, suggesting he could explain why his DNA might be found on it. He claimed it was all a setup, orchestrated by the eyewitness to implicate him. Despite his attempt to deflect suspicion, he admitted that the box had indeed been in his home on Springfield Street. The suspect conceded that a box from his house had been used to carry Daisy's body parts. This admission was a critical breakthrough. The suspect further admitted that it was possible Daisy had lost her life in his home. This was a significant shift from his previous answers, aligning more closely with the witness's account. These admissions combined with the forensic evidence strengthened the case against him. The suspect confessed that he looked guilty and could possibly be convicted in court. He admitted that the mounting evidence, his connection to the box, the location of the slaying, and his relationship with Daisy painted a damning picture. Despite his claims of being framed, his own statements had inadvertently solidified his status as the prime suspect in Daisy's case. Detectives continued to build their case, piecing together the timeline of events leading up to Daisy's demise. They scrutinized the suspect's background, seeking any history of violent behavior or other potential motives. In light of the new evidence and the suspect's partial confessions, the case against him grew stronger. The prosecution prepared to present a comprehensive narrative that would encompass the witness testimony, forensic findings, and the suspect's own incriminating statements. The goal was to provide a clear and convincing argument that would lead to a conviction and finally bring justice to Daisy Shelton. The witness testified at a grand jury hearing but lost his life before the suspect could be prosecuted. The suspect, who was not named, passed away in September 2022 at the age of 92. Despite his demise, the grand jury hearing provided crucial insights into the case. They revealed the depth of the investigation and the compelling evidence gathered against him. The suspect's testimony and the findings were meticulously documented, ensuring that Daisy Shelton's story would not fade into obscurity. Law enforcement officials and legal experts analyzed the suspect's testimony and the accumulated evidence. They strived to piece together a comprehensive account of the crime. The courage of the eyewitness, who broke his silence after so many years, was instrumental in reigniting the case. His detailed confession, alongside the suspect's reluctant admissions, solidified the narrative of Daisy Shelton's tragic end. Although the suspect's demise precluded a formal trial, the investigation's transparency brought some solace to the community. Public statements from detectives affirmed that every effort had been made to uncover the truth and bring justice to light. Finally, after 60 years, on March 29, 2024, the Miami County Sheriff's Office announced that prosecutor Anthony Kendall determined Daisy Shelton's case was solved. They decided this due to the confession from the suspect, who has now passed away, as well as other evidence. Daisy's granddaughter, Maria Walling, said that her father, Rodney, also passed away before learning what happened to his mom. Maria said they never found the slayer when they found all the body parts, and it really messed him up. She knows the names of the men involved in her grandmother's slaying, but deputies will not release them. I am like, finally. They found the perpetrators. There were 3. I can't help but feel for the families who will soon learn the truth about how my grandmother's life was taken. While Daisy's family now knows who was responsible for her death, the police have yet to determine a clear motive. Though Daisy Shelton's case may never reach a courtroom verdict, the tireless search for justice, fueled by modern forensic advancements and the courage of a key witness, has ensured that her story is no longer forgotten by time. Moving on to the next case. Daniel Entwistle. On May 3, 2003, 7-year-old Daniel Entwistle from Great Yarmouth, England, returned home after running an errand for his mother. After entering the house, Daniel asked his father, David Entwistle, for money to buy some sweets. He left again and was captured on the store's CCTV. Daniel was seen once more on the store's surveillance camera, cycling by. This was the last confirmed sighting of Daniel. His red and white bike was discovered along a harbor wall near the River Yar, about half a mile from his home, at around 3 a.m. on Sunday, May 4th. Authorities initially speculated that he might have fallen into the river and drowned, but his body was never found, possibly swept out to the North Sea. However, Daniel was afraid of water and unable to swim, making it seem unlikely that he would have climbed the harbor wall, putting himself at risk of falling into the river. In 2003, Joseph Sigger came forward a few days after Daniel disappeared and said he had seen Daniel playing with some kids near a raised wall by the River Yar, where Daniel's bike was found, around lunchtime on May 3rd and again around 4 p.m. that same day. Sagger said Daniel and other children often played there. What's interesting about Sagger's claim is that it conflicts with Daniel's mother, Paula's, statement on where she and the family went that day. Paula claimed the whole family went shopping earlier in the day, returned home, and then Paula went to rest as she felt unwell, yet Sagger claimed to have seen Daniel playing around lunchtime. Despite a large police search of the area, Daniel was never found. Heartbreakingly, due to few funds and no PR campaign, his disappearance stopped being reported by the media after only a few days, and the case was closed by police just 3 months after he had vanished. The boy's father, David Entwistle, died in 2015. It is worth noting that David was convicted of having sex with a 12-year-old girl back in 1985. Police were aware of the conviction when Daniel vanished, but it was never made public. David was interviewed by detectives before his death in the search for his son but never made a suspect. Daniel remains missing to this day. Moving on to the next case. Denise Balser. Denise Balser was a 24-year-old woman residing in Raymond, New Hampshire, and working as a bookkeeper for a small company. On January 17, 1985, she vanished, leaving behind only one clue, a note. When her husband returned home, he discovered the message, which read, "We've got your wife." A few days later, authorities located her pickup truck parked at Logan Airport in Boston. Denise's social security card, birth certificate, and credit cards were neatly arranged and left in the car. Authorities initially pursued the theory that she had been kidnapped but found no substantial evidence beyond the cryptic note. Later, they considered the possibility that she had left voluntarily, though her close-knit family suspected foul play. A year after her disappearance, Denise was indicted in absentia for embezzling $12,000 from her employer. With no further leads, the case eventually went cold. That was until 17 years later in 2002. It was then that the FBI believed that they found her. She was now going by the name of Denise Jones. She was still a bookkeeper and had started a new family. 42-year-old Denise was elated to see her family when they knocked on the door. She explained that her boss wanted to end her life because of the embezzlement. Denise claimed that it was closer to a $100,000 that she embezzled. The county prosecutors dropped the charges against her because her former boss was long deceased. Denise lived in South Carolina, the Bahamas, California, and Hawaii, while she was missing and lived in Florida since 1996. Her current husband was stunned, but said a lot of things that didn't make sense before did now. Denise would always be depressed on Mother's Day and out of sorts on holidays. She never talked about her family. Moving on to the next case. Derek Michael Mason. In January 1992, the remains of an unidentified individual were found alongside the Pennsylvania Turnpike in Clay Township, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania State Police, PSP, responded to the scene and determined that the remains belonged to a male, estimated to be 5 feet 10 inches tall and between 18 and 30 years old. The cause of death was believed to be homicide. At the time of his discovery, the man was wearing a light blue long-sleeve sweater from Kate Collins and a size 36 pair of men's Fruit of the Loom jockey-style underwear. The man also had a scar on his chest from a previous bullet wound that had healed. In April 2017, details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement investigators to identify the man, no matches were found. The case went cold due to a lack of viable leads. In 2022, the Pennsylvania State Police submitted forensic evidence to Othram. Othram's scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence. They used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown man. After successfully completing the process, the DNA profile was delivered to a PSP analyst, who performed the necessary work to generate new investigative leads in the case. A follow-up investigation was conducted using the new leads that led investigators to potential relatives of the man. This investigation led to the positive identification of the man, who is now known to be Derek Michael Mason. Derek was last seen leaving his home in the 500 block of South 39th Street in West Philadelphia in October 1991. Derek was known in the area by the names Hawkeye and Hawk. He was never reported missing. Anyone with information regarding the slaying of Derek Mason is asked to contact Trooper Brian McNally, PSP Lancaster, at 717-290-1967. PSP Tips is offering a $2,000 reward for any information that leads to an arrest in this case. Keenan Day Bennett. In criminal cases, proving that a crime has taken place can be challenging when there is no body. Without this key evidence, the defense can argue that there is sufficient room for doubt, suggesting that the victim may have disappeared voluntarily. Historically, securing a conviction in murder cases without a body has been difficult. However, with advancements in forensic technology, we are now witnessing more and more cases where justice is achieved despite the absence of a body. On September 29, 2002, Vartasha McCullough informed Kmart staff that her 4-year-old daughter, Kenanda Bennett, was missing. According to McCullough, they had visited the Kmart in Whiteville, North Carolina around 5 p.m. when the girl disappeared. Initially, McCullough claimed that Kenanda vanished from an aisle in the store. However, she later revised her statement, saying she had entered the Kmart thinking her daughter was behind her, only to turn around and find her missing. McCullough and her daughter were from Conway, South Carolina, and had been visiting Kenanda's uncle in Whiteville at the time. Although the Kmart staff called emergency services, they noted that McCullough had initially opposed the idea. Local law enforcement quickly began searching the store and its surrounding areas but grew suspicious when no witnesses were found who had seen McCullough with Kenanda. Despite the presence of CCTV cameras in the store, there was no footage showing the 4-year-old. Investigators also found no evidence that Kenanda had even entered the state. Aside from her parents, McCullough and Eddie Bennett Jr., who went by Kevin, no one had seen her in the 2 days leading up to her disappearance. Authorities searched the couple's car, but there was no child seat in it, and no other signs that a young child had been present except a single Matchbox toy car, which they found wedged under a seat. As law enforcement officers became more doubtful about the McCullough story, they were approached by further witnesses from the couple's hometown who claimed that they had seen Kenanda with bruises on her shoulder and face just days before she vanished. When asked about them, the 4-year-old said, "My mommy did it." While one witness did confront Kenanda's mother, McCullough told them, "I'm going to whip her ass for telling you." Further fueling this idea, a second witness reported seeing cuts on the child's body and marks that looked as if they'd been caused by a strap. And Kenanda's grandparents had become so concerned for her welfare that on September 29th, the very day she went missing, they told the police in Conway that they suspected the 4-year-old was being abused. They had not seen Kenanda in a week, and before contacting police, they went to confront their daughter with their suspicions. But while they heard someone moving around inside her apartment, nobody answered the door. Investigators noted that both of Kenanda's parents seemed uninterested in her case and never asked for any updates beyond the first week of the investigation. Additionally, McCullough failed a polygraph test regarding her daughter's disappearance, while Kenanda's father, Kevin Bennett, refused to take one, although both had samples of their blood and saliva taken. According to the authorities, both were uncooperative and both had inconsistencies in their stories. When McCullough was told that she had failed her polygraph, she reportedly cried. An officer said to her, We both know that whatever happened to that child did not happen in North Carolina. It happened in that apartment, didn't it?" Here, Cananda's mother reportedly nodded. However, when she was asked to take them to where the body was, she told them she couldn't. After regaining her composure, McCullough retracted her previous admission and maintained that she had lost her daughter while at the Kmart store. When the police searched the family's home in Conway, things got worse. Investigators noted that the home had been sanitized with bleach, the smell still lingering in the air. 3 bottles of the substance, a damp mop, and several towels lay in plain sight. McCullough claimed that she was cleaning the apartment in preparation for an upcoming inspection by housing authorities, but officers believed she was attempting to clean up a crime scene. Searches of the home turned up transfer stains, which are stains left behind when fluid splatters are wiped, which matched Cananda's DNA. Authorities said that the scene would suggest that a physical assault had taken place. Furthermore, Cananda's toys and clothing had been thrown out as if her parents didn't believe she'd be coming home. And both McCullough and Bennett used past tense when talking about their missing daughter. In February of 2003, Hanan's parents were arrested and charged with homicide by child abuse in connection with their daughter's case. Investigators claimed that the DNA evidence found in the apartment proved that the 4-year-old had died in Conway and had never even set foot in South Carolina. This, combined with the numerous witness statements about Cananda's abuse, led to the couple being charged. Around the same time, however, the parents accused the police of racism as they felt they did not conduct enough searches for their daughter. 2 years later, in October of 2005, Bennett's charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence. McCullough, however, was charged with more crimes, including unlawful neglects of a child and inflicting grievous bodily harm on a child. Throughout her trial, McCullough maintained her innocence. The prosecution theorized that Cananda's death was unintentional and that her mother had panicked and attempted to conceal the crime. However, the mother of one's defense said that McCullough had always maintained that she was not guilty and that the state has no evidence to the contrary. Despite this, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict. McCullough was convicted of all charges and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Reportedly, she burst into tears and clutched a Bible upon hearing this verdict. And her family appeared to be visibly upset by the news. McCullough's father, the one who'd reported his granddaughter's abuse to the police, believes his daughter is innocent. In the years since, McCullough has never told investigators what happened or where Kinane's body is. Cananda was described as a bright and well-mannered young girl who could read simple words and count to 30. She was a fan of SpongeBob SquarePants. Investigators suspect that her father was involved in her disappearance, and they have stated that they will pursue charges if new evidence emerges. Natasha McCullough is scheduled for release from prison in 2023. Cananda's case marked the first time in South Carolina history that a trial for a child's murder was held without the discovery of a body. Moving on to the next case. Kieran and Ornith Murphy. Kieran and Ornith Murphy were an Irish couple who relocated to the United States in the 1960s. Kieran worked as an actuary for San Francisco's Employee Retirement System office, while Ornith was an expert solo sailor. Ornith was well known in the sailing community and occasionally contributed to sailing magazines. She owned a 1980 39-foot fiberglass auxiliary sailboat named Sola 3. The vessel featured dark blue circular emblems with a gray swirl painted on both sides, making it easily recognizable. The couple lived in San Francisco and had 2 sons, David and Patrick. Kieran did not know how to sail, and being on the water made him seasick, but he did help with the maintenance of the boat. They had amassed a small fortune through real estate speculation. For years, Kieran and Ornith lived a happy life, but in 2001 their marriage started to fall apart due to Kieran having an affair. The couple were in the midst of getting a divorce later in the year. Along with the potential divorce, the Murphys were also facing a potentially costly lawsuit stemming from a 1999 fire at one of their apartment complexes, which severely burned a 2-year-old girl. At the time, Kieran was living in an apartment in Nob Hill and Ornith had moved in with her niece in Oakland. Her boat was docked at the Oakland Marina in the Jack London Square area of the city. On December 15th, 2001, both Kieran and Ornith would vanish along with Ornith's sailboat. Kieran was last seen at a Christmas office party on December 14th. Kieran has never been heard from again. His friends and family became concerned when he failed to report for work on December 17th, and they filed a missing persons report. It was at this point that they realized that Ornith was also missing. Ornith was last seen in Oakland on December 16th, the day after Kieran had gone missing. The sailboat disappeared on the same day as Ornith and has never been located. It was found that Kieran and Ornith had planned to meet on December 15th to discuss legal issues. Ornith was seen working on her boat that afternoon. A witness reported seeing a man on board who was similar in appearance to Kieran. However, it was never established if he really was Kieran. Witnesses also reported hearing a loud noise coming from the boat in the evening. The witness described it as a banging noise. However, they weren't sure if the sounds were of gunshots. The boat was captured on video surveillance pulling out of the Oakland Marina at 8:36 p.m. that night. The boat was not equipped for long-distance sailing. It had about 1 week's worth of food on it when it disappeared, but no safety or foul weather gear. The next morning, Ornith called her niece from the boat and said she was in the marina in Berkeley. Her niece invited her to breakfast, but Ornith declined the invitation. No one ever heard from Kieran or Ornith again. Kieran's friends say that Kieran was planning on a trip to Mexico after Christmas. The couple's sons say it would be uncharacteristic of them to leave without warning. One theory surrounding the disappearance of Kieran and Ornith Murphy suggests that Ornith shot Kieran and then took her own life shortly afterward. However, there is no concrete evidence to support this theory. Despite the speculation, neither of the couple's credit cards nor their bank accounts have been accessed since their disappearances. Now, 18 years later, the Murphys remain missing, with no definitive answers about what happened to them during that time. Moving on to the next case. Lillian Marie Cardenas. In February 1967, unidentified remains were found at the bottom of a cliff north of Jenner, Sonoma County, California. The remains belonged to a woman who was between 52 and 54 inches tall. She wore a long-sleeved white blouse that buttoned down the back, along with light-colored pants. It was determined that she had likely died the previous year. Her manner of demise was ruled as slaying. She had multiple skull and rib fractures. Despite investigators' attempts, the woman could not be identified. She became known as Sonoma County Jane Doe. A forensic composite was developed. The case was made public in hopes of generating new leads about the woman's identity, but no matches were found. She was buried at the Sonoma County Cemetery. The details of the case were later added to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. In 2009, her body was exhumed with the help of Dr. Mark Griffin, an anthropology professor from San Francisco State University. The examination determined that Jane Doe was a white female between 40 and 46 years old. In 2022, the California Department of Justice, in collaboration with the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office, submitted forensic evidence to Othram, hoping that advanced DNA testing could assist with the identification of the woman. Othram's scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence. They used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown woman. Othram's in-house genealogy team used the DNA profile in a forensic genetic genealogy search to produce new investigative leads, which were returned to investigators. A follow-up investigation was conducted by law enforcement with the new leads. This led to relatives of the unidentified woman. Nearly 60 years after the remains were discovered in Sonoma County, the remains have been identified as Lillian Marie Cardenas, who was born in 1928. Lillian's last known residence was in San Francisco. She had been estranged from her family prior to her demise. The investigation into her demise is ongoing. Investigators ask for anyone with information on Lillian Marie Cardenas to dial 707-565-2727 or email officials at sheriff-coldcase@sonoma-county.org. Moving on to the next case. Lynn Scholes. Lynn Scholes, a 17-year-old freshman at Middlebury College in Middlebury, Vermont, was looking forward to her final exams in December 1971. She had studied diligently for her English drama exam, scheduled for 1 p.m. on December 10th. At 12:55 p.m., Lynn left her dormitory with her friends to head to the exam. However, on the way there, she realized she had forgotten her lucky pen and told her friends she was going back to retrieve it from her room. That would be the last time Lynn was seen by her friends. She never returned to take her exam, and when they went to her dorm room, she was nowhere to be found. Although her friends initially thought it was strange, they waited for 2 days before reporting her as missing. A week later, her parents were informed of her disappearance. Lynn's personal belongings, including her checkbook, identification, and wallet, were left behind in her dorm room. During the police investigation, they found that on the day Lynn went missing, she was seen outside of a health food store called All the Good Things, eating prunes, just prior to meeting up with her friends to take the exam at around 12:30 p.m. During that time, she had reportedly mentioned to someone that she was going to New York but that the bus had already left. Lynn then returned to campus where she had that walk with her friends and reportedly claimed she left her pen back in her dorm room. Later that day, witnesses reported to have seen Lynn again standing at the same bus stop where she was seen earlier around 2:15 p.m. This 2:15 p.m. confirmed sighting of her would be the last. Police at the time considered the possibility that Lynn had left of her own accord. Lynn had previously sent letters to her family stating she was homesick and was thinking of withdrawing from school. However, her friends and family said she was looking forward to going back to her home in Addison County, Vermont for the Christmas holidays, and they do not believe she would have run away. There were several sightings of Lynn in the days following her disappearance, but none of them were confirmed. The case would soon grow cold. Then in 2015, a tip led investigators to link Robert Durst as a possible suspect in Lynn's disappearance. Robert Durst was the owner of the All Good Things health food store, the same store that Lynn was last seen eating prunes in front of. Moreover, the store was across the street from the bus stop where Lynn was also seen. Robert Durst is the prime suspect in his wife Kathleen Durst's disappearance, and is also a suspect in the unsolved murder of Susan Berman. He was charged and acquitted for the murder of Morris Black in 2003. He is also considered a possible suspect in several other murders and disappearances, and his complete, troubling story is explored in HBO's documentary, The Jinx. Before the tip, investigators were unaware that Robert Durst had once owned the health food store, All Good Things. However, there is no solid evidence connecting him to Lynn's disappearance, and no new information has been released to the public. The case remains unsolved, and anyone with information about Lynn's whereabouts or what happened to her is urged to contact Detective Chris Bodish at 802-388-3191. Moving on to the next case. Maritza Glean Grimmett. In April 1983, children discovered the skeletal remains of an unidentified individual in a culvert in what is now Lake Forest, California. Responding to the scene near Old Trabuco and Canada Roads, an excavation was conducted to recover more remains. Upon examination, it was determined that the remains belonged to a female who was likely black or of mixed race. She was estimated to be between 5 feet 3 inches and 5 feet 6 inches tall, and between the ages of 18 and 24 years. Jane Doe was also noted to have a distinctive gold tooth. It was determined that the woman had been the victim of a homicide. In August 2010, the details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Over the years, multiple forensic renderings of the woman were released in hopes of generating new leads. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement to identify her, no matches were found, and the case eventually went cold due to a lack of viable leads. In 2022, the Orange County Sheriff's Department submitted forensic evidence to Othram, hoping that advanced DNA testing could help to finally identify the woman. Othram's scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence and used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown woman. After successfully completing the process, the DNA profile was delivered to the FBI's Forensic Genetic Genealogy team, and the FBI team performed the necessary work to generate new investigative leads in the case. Using these new leads, investigators contacted a distant genetic relative of the victim, who suggested Jane Doe's forensic renderings be posted to a Facebook group for Jane Does and missing women from the 1970s-1980s. Approximately 1 month after the posting, a woman contacted investigators and said she believed the Lake Forest Jane Doe could be her missing mother. Lake Forest Jane Doe is now known to be Maritza Gleam Grimmett, a Panamanian native, married a U.S. Marine in the summer of 1978, and gave birth to a daughter. In late 1978, the family moved to the U.S. The family resided in Columbus, Ohio and Millington, Tennessee in late 1978 through mid-1979. In July 1979, the couple was going through a divorce. Maritza told her sister she was going to California. Her family never heard from her again since. She was 20 years old at the time of her disappearance. Investigators are actively investigating Maritza's slaying. Anyone with information on this case is asked to contact investigator Bob Taft at 714-647-7045 or coldcase@oaksheriff.gov. Anonymous tips may be submitted to OC Crime Stoppers at 855-847-6227 or at occrimestoppers.org. Moving on to the next case. Stephanie Nurse. Stephanie Nurse was born on April 28, 1997, at Groote Schuur Hospital in Cape Town, South Africa. Celeste, her mother, recalled seeing a nurse comforting Stephanie next to her bed before she fell asleep. However, when Celeste woke up, a nurse was urgently asking where Stephanie was. It was then that Celeste realized her daughter had been taken. At first, she thought it might have been a cruel joke, but as time went on, it became clear that their daughter had been abducted. Each year on April 28th, a family would celebrate Stephanie's birthday. They also did a lot of interviews to keep the search for her in the media. In July 2009, the family received a call where a woman whispered, "I know about your daughter." The woman then asked the 500,000 South African rand, which is about $70,000 US. When they went to the spot where the drop-off was supposed to take place, no one arrived to collect the money. The call was later traced to Glenda DeBell, who was a neighbor of Celeste Nurse. Linda was charged with extortion. The nurses also had a second daughter, named Cassidy Nurse. She started at a new school in 2015. There she met a girl 4 years older than her, that looked very similar to her. Cassidy shared the news with her father, Mornay Nurse, who then arranged to meet a woman named Mikey Solomon. When Mornay saw Mikey, he immediately noticed a striking resemblance, and he began to believe that she might be his daughter, Zephanie. DNA tests were conducted, confirming that Mikey Solomon was indeed Zephanie Nurse. In August 2016, Livona Solomon, the woman who had taken Zephanie and raised her as her own, was sentenced to 10 years in prison. It is believed that Livona had concealed a miscarriage and the remainder of her pregnancy before abducting Zephanie and pretending to have given birth to her. Moving on to the next case. Xavier Rollins. On June 17, 2014, a young man tragically lost his life outside the River Crossing apartment complex in Texarkana, Texas. Xavier Rollins, a 25-year-old Army veteran, was the beloved son of Charlotte Rollins. Charlotte, despite facing numerous challenges, never gave up in her relentless pursuit of justice for her son. Years later, a breakthrough in the case would finally provide answers to what had once seemed like an unsolvable mystery. Xavier, who shared a close and loving bond with his mother, spent much of his time with her, and their relationship was built on love and mutual support. Everything changed on June 17, 2014, when Xavier was fatally shot outside the River Crossing apartment complex on College Drive. At just 25 years old, he had been out of the Army for 4 years and was working hard to build a future for himself. Although an investigation into his death was launched, no significant leads came forward, and the case remained unsolved, leaving Charlotte to cope with her profound loss. Despite the case going cold, her resolve to seek justice never faltered. On the 8th anniversary of Xavier's death, June 17, 2022, Charlotte organized a balloon release in an effort to renew attention on the case and encourage anyone with information to come forward. This poignant event was not just a tribute to Xavier, but also a call to the community to remember the impact of violence and to support families like hers who are left searching for answers. She expressed the following, encapsulating the longing for closure that she and countless other families endure. If someone came forward, I would know my prayers have been answered. Charlotte brought a banner adorned with photographs of local crime victims, highlighting the ongoing struggle for justice faced by many. She stated, "We have some of them that, yes, the case has been solved, but we have a whole lot of them that have not been solved." In 2024, a significant breakthrough occurred in the long unsolved case of Xavier Rollins, renewing hope for his family and friends. The police never ceased their efforts to find justice for Xavier, and Detective Thomas Shaddix had been diligently working on the cold case for several months. His commitment to uncovering the truth led him to discover DNA evidence, testing options that had not been available a decade earlier. Recognizing the potential of this technology, he decided to pursue it, in hopes of finally finding answers for the Rollins family. As Detective Shaddix delved deeper into the investigation, he sought the expertise of the Texas Attorney General's Cold Case and Missing Persons Unit, which provided invaluable assistance. Their collaboration was made possible through a federal grant program from the Department of Justice, allowing them access to numerous resources, including expedited forensic testing. These advanced forensic methods enabled law enforcement to identify 27-year-old Cameron Cheatham as a suspect in the 2014 slaying of Xavier. Following the identification of Cheatham, the Attorney General's office played a critical role in facilitating his arrest. Using the newly uncovered evidence, Detective Shaddix secured a warrant for Cheatham, charging him with capital slaying. Cheatham was not difficult to locate, as he was already in custody at the bi-state jail, serving time for a felony probation violation warrant stemming from his arrest in September. This fortunate turn of events allowed the police to expedite the legal process and ensure that justice was being sought for Xavier. On October 1, 2024, Charlotte received the life-changing call she had been longing for. She will never forget the moment when Detective Shaddix informed her of the arrest. Charlotte recalled, her voice filled with emotion. "And he said, 'We made an arrest.' And I just went to screaming and hollering and yelling. I mean, you would have thought that I had just had a baby for the first time. That is what that felt like. It is like, okay, I'm about to get justice for my baby," she shared. "I have got 30 to 40 shirts with his picture on them. Everywhere I went, he was going to see his face." After the arrest, Cheatham was booked on a capital murder charge, with his bond set at a substantial $1 million. The upcoming trial brought a renewed sense of purpose and closure, reigniting the hope that had gradually diminished over the years. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.